Thanks for joining us. In this information report, we'll look at government tax expenditures and how they relate to provincial spending. Tax expenditures are a form of tax break that government offers to people and corporations in support of its policy objectives. Tax expenditures are essentially foregone revenue or money that government doesn't collect but could if it didn't offer the tax exemptions, allowances, rate reductions, deferrals, or non-refundable credits. In 2016-17, the BC government reported over $7 billion in tax expenditures, and yet government doesn't report them in a way that's transparent and easily understood. Tax expenditures are a significant component of government's fiscal plan, but legislators may not have all the information they need to determine whether tax expenditures continue to achieve government's policy objectives. The BC government also discloses information on tax expenditures in its annual budget document, but this annual reporting could be improved. The main purpose of a tax system is to raise funds to pay for government programs and services, and to cover the administrative cost of government. But tax systems can also be used to further a government's policy objectives through tax expenditures. Tax expenditures help support government's social, economic, and environmental objectives. For example, BC does not charge provincial sales tax on bicycles, which means government forgoes an estimated $23 million a year in provincial sales tax revenues. However, this supports environmental policy objectives by encouraging citizens to use bicycles. In BC, government currently reports actual direct spending in its summary financial statements. In comparison, estimates of actual tax expenditures are included in an appendix to government's annual budget and fiscal plan. The disclosures include all significant tax expenditures, but information is limited. Legislators need more comprehensive information to evaluate the effectiveness of tax expenditures. For each tax expenditure, legislators should understand its purpose and policy objective, when it came into effect, when it was last reviewed for effectiveness, and the annual value that's foregone. Right now, the information needed to achieve this understanding isn't easily accessible. Government debates and votes on its budgeted direct spending every year. Comparatively, tax expenditures are only debated and voted on when the legislation for them is enacted or changes to the legislation are made. Some tax legislation and associated tax breaks are decades old. A good example of this is the homeowner grant, which was introduced over 60 years ago. A 1969 publication stated that the grant was introduced to relieve the pressure of rising property taxes on homeowners and to encourage the buying and building of new homes. The homeowner grant is still in effect today, but represents only a very small portion of property taxes paid. It may no longer be effective in supporting government's policy objectives. As mentioned earlier, in 2016-17, government reported over $7 billion in tax expenditures. Comparatively, direct spending on all government programs, for example, programs such as healthcare and education, totaled $48.7 billion. For this report, we looked at the reporting from a number of other governments. We found that some governments report their tax expenditures more fully, including the Canadian federal government. The Department of Finance Canada has very progressive reporting, which includes 8 years of tax expenditure information, as well as links to the applicable legislation and the purpose of each tax expenditure. We also found that some governments are required by legislation to disclose their tax expenditures, and some governments use the guidance provided by the International Monetary Fund and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. You can read more about the way these other governments are reporting in Appendix D of the report. The last time we mentioned this topic was almost 25 years ago in our 1993-1994 Report on Public Accounts. In that report, we made recommendations on how government could improve its reporting of tax expenditures. Shortly after our report was published, government started to disclose tax expenditures in its annual budget and fiscal plan. However, not much has changed in reporting since then, and the way government reports these expenditures is now outdated. There are always opportunities to improve disclosure, which we urge government to consider. More comprehensive reporting of tax expenditures in BC would increase understanding of its importance to government's fiscal plan. That's our report summary for today. Thank you for joining us. We'd like to encourage you to read the full report. It and our other reports are available on our website at www.bcauditor.com.